with the Poisk module. You see Anton Shkaplerov, he'll be wiping down the hatch seal interface that is customary to make sure there's no foreign object debris that would cause a problem with the leak checks that will take place before the vestibule, the short passageway at the interface between the Soyuz and the station once it is depressurized down to vacuum. For the vestibule,
Антон, можно приступать к закрытию?
Я вас понял. Разрешили. Давайте, счастливо. Хорошей дороги, мягкой посадки.
And Shkaplerov has now closed the hatch on the Poisk side of the docking interface.
Альтаиры от нижнего зала, спасибо за работу, за прекрасные полгода. Штат протоколка и мягкой посадки. Ждем вас на земле.
This is Mission Control Houston, now official confirmation that both hatches are closed at 1:58 p.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Eastern Time. So the crew continuing to move along the way on the timeline. About 15 minutes from now, the crew on both sides of the hatch interface will conduct vestibule leak checks. The Soyuz crew, now behind that closed hatchway, that being Mazurkin, Vandehei, and Akaba, will then begin to don their Sokol launch and entry suits, conduct suit leak checks, as they move along the timeline that will lead to the undocking of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft from Poisk about 3 hours and 10 minutes from now. Undocking is scheduled again at 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time.
Я понял. All right, so I'm going to start sending some commands.
Once again, the Soyuz spacecraft is comprised of 3 sections. The uppermost section, the bulbous section, if you will, is called the orbital module. The middle section is the descent module, where the crew will be strapped into their respective seats. Mazurkin in the center seat, flanked on his left by board engineer number 1, Mark Vandehei, and on the right by Joe Akaba, the 2 NASA flight engineers flanking Mazurkin for today's entry and landing. The rear section of the Soyuz spacecraft is the instrumentation and propulsion module. That is where the main engines are.
Понял тебя. По 28-й странице готовы работать?
And of course all the propulsion systems for the Soyuz spacecraft. Once the deorbit burn occurs a bit later in the day, the deorbit burn scheduled at 7:38 and 39 seconds p.m. Central Time, a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enabling it to drop out of orbit. Some 27 minutes after the deorbit burn, right before the spacecraft enters into the Earth's atmosphere, the three sections of the Soyuz will separate on pyrotechnic command. The descent module will be oriented with the heat shield in the direction of travel to ablate the buildup of heat against the spacecraft as they moved into the plasma regime. Returning crew members call this returning to Earth in the middle of a fireball, but that's what the heat shield is all about, to ablate and dispel all of the heat that builds up around the descent module for about 5 minutes worth of entry into the peak heating regime, where the plasma builds up around the spacecraft itself.
S-16, отключаем резервы ССВП. И восстановилась индикация основного корабельного ССВП. Д7 горит. Выдаем команду Д8. Д8 выдали. Ступенчато открываем РПВ-1 через закрытое положение, да, Марк? Угу. Хорошо, есть РПВ-1 открыт. Включаем питание ПКРД основной резервный. Есть. И даджо. Открываем ПКРД. Есть подача Л2 на ТС-8. Хорошо. Перешли на 29-ю страницу. Георгий, готовы работать, приступить к проверке герметичности переходных люков? Шаг 4.
Sasha, how do you copy me?
Саш, как меня слышно?
Слышу хорошо, Гоша. Доложил, что готовы работать по шагу 4, по странице 29.
Да, Саш, я все понял. Скажи мне, пожалуйста, давление высота текущее и парциальное давление кислорода.
Мы сейчас
Moscow Station on space to ground 1. Go ahead.
23 миллиметра. Парциальное давление кислорода 152 миллиметра.
Штатное включение фидера, питание МИН-2.
Related message, off-nominal deactivation of MRM2 power feeder. Stand by.
Антон, все нормально, это что там?
And Todd, that's an expected message. You can go ahead and clear it.
Принял, все нормально. Отвечаю.
Copy expected. Clearing the caution warning summary. Copy and concur.
While we have a minute here, again, you're looking at the closed hatch on the International Space Station side of the interface. Right behind that hatch is the closed hatch of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. The crews said goodbye to one another about 10 minutes or so ago. The hatches were closed at 1:58 p.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a few questions submitted on social media that we can answer for you at the moment. The first submitted, are there escape pods that eject from the station? Not exactly pods per se, but what departs the station is what you'll see later today, that being a Soyuz spacecraft. They're not escape pods, they're return vehicles. There are 2 Soyuzes at the station at any given time to provide a return capability for the 6 crew members on board the International Space Station. So although escape pods are not ejected per se, there are Soyuz spacecraft like the one we'll see undocking from the station a little over 3 hours from now that will bring home 3 of the 6 crew members currently residing on board the International Space Station. The next Twitter question that we received, how long does it take for the Soyuz to burn through the atmosphere? Basically, from the time of the deorbit burn that slows the Soyuz down, it enables that retrograde firing that we've been talking about. that slows the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enables it to drop out of low Earth orbit to begin its journey through the atmosphere back to the landing site. It takes about 53 minutes from the time of the deorbit burn until the landing itself. The crew will enter into the upper regions of the Earth's atmosphere some 30 minutes after the deorbit burn itself, and then the period of peak heating around the spacecraft is about a 5-minute transit until it gets low enough into the Earth's atmosphere for the peak heating to subside. Finally, after landing that is scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time this evening, the question is, after landing from a long space trip, how long do your legs stay like jello before you can walk again? Essentially, that varies from crew member to crew member. Once the crew is extracted from the Soyuz vehicle at the landing site, they're placed in chairs right by their spacecraft to have a few minutes to get their land legs back and to regain their equilibrium. The crew, don't forget, has been off the planet for 168 days in a weightless environment with no gravity tugging at their lower extremities. So it takes a few days for the crew members, every crew member that returns from a long-duration spaceflight, to feel somewhat normal again and to get their equilibrium back. And again, this varies from crew member to crew member. All of these questions are great. They are submitted on the hashtag of Ask NASA, and we're happy to answer those questions from the public and from interested observers whenever we have an opportunity. As you look at this live view of the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow from a balcony camera overlooking the ISS flight control room there, just to recap, the 3 departing crew members from Expedition 54, Alexander Mazurkin, Joe Acaba, and Mark Vande Hei, they have closed the hatch to the transfer compartment, basically closing the hatch between the descent module and the upper portion of the Soyuz spacecraft, the orbital module. They soon will don their Sokol launch and entry suits, conduct leak checks on those suits, as well as at the interface, the docking interface between the Soyuz and the Poisk module of the International Space Station, to which their Soyuz spacecraft has been linked for the past 168 days. Down in Kazakhstan, where the temperature is in the mid-20s, it is overcast. There has been some freezing rain over the past 24 hours. The Russian search and recovery forces are finalizing their plans for the recovery of Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Acaba once they touch down on the steppe of Kazakhstan, landing scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time, which is 8:31 a.m. Wednesday morning, about 27 minutes after sunrise at the landing site. So we'll wrap up our coverage of hatch closure, which occurred at 1:58 p.m. Central Time. Everything is proceeding through the timeline to bring home Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Acaba later this evening, with landing scheduled again at 8:31 p.m. Central Time this evening, 8:31 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Wednesday morning. We will be back in about 2.5 hours to resume our coverage of tonight's activities with undocking coverage. Our coverage beginning at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the undocking, at 5:08 p.m. Central, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, thanks for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of hours to continue our coverage of the return to Earth of Soyuz MS-06, Mazurkin, Acaba, and Vande Hei. For now, this is Mission Control Houston. Good day from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and welcome to our day-long and evening-long coverage of the return from the International Space Station of 3 of the crew members constituting the Expedition 54 crew. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be on for a number of hours throughout the course of the afternoon and the evening as the flight control team here in Houston works globally with support personnel in Kazakhstan and in Russia to bring home the 3 crew members that are the focus of attention today: Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin and NASA astronauts Joe Acaba and Mark Vande Hei. Here in the flight control room, the shift handover for the Orbit 3 team has just been completed. On console at this hour, at the bottom of your screen, is Flight Director Judd Freeling. He's joined on console to his right at the top of your screen by European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen, a veteran of Soyuz launch and landing activities. Mogensen will be talking with the crew on board the International Space Station throughout the course of the day's activities. Also here in the flight control room on console is the visiting vehicle officer, Adam Faust. He will be talking directly to a team of counterparts at the Russian Mission Control Center across the ocean on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov, who will be coordinating today's activities to bring home Mazurkin, Acaba, and Vande Hei. This is a live view from a balcony camera overlooking the International Space Station flight control room at the Russian Mission Control Center you become familiar with over the course of the past few years. This is the team that will be supervising the undocking of the Soyuz MS-06 later today from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, and its eventual deorbit and landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan. We'll be talking more about conditions in Kazakhstan and the choreography of tonight's landing and recovery operations in just a moment. The 3 crew members who are poised to say farewell to their colleagues on board the International Space Station and begin the trek home are Alexander Mazurkin, the Soyuz commander, who will be strapped into the center seat of the descent module of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft for tonight's activities. He will be flanked on his left by the board engineer number 1, NASA flight engineer Mark Vande Hei, and on his right by Joe Acaba, the flight engineer, who is wrapping up his mission along with Mazurkin and Vande Hei. This trio of crew members began their expedition as part of Expedition 53 all the way back in September, just 3 weeks after Hurricane Harvey drenched Houston and swamped the ensuing locales. Hurricane Harvey, of course, striking the Texas coast back on the last week in August, and this crew launched just 3 weeks after that from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Assuming an on-time landing this evening, this crew will have aggregated 168 days in space and also aboard the International Space Station, having made a same-day rendezvous from the launch pad in Baikonur to its docking to the Poisk module on the International Space Station. They will have completed 2,688 orbits of the Earth and 71.1 million miles of travel in this 168 days in space. For Mazurkin, completing his second flight into space, his total time on these 2 expeditions of 168 days will bring him to an aggregate total of 334 days in space on his 2 flights. He also conducted 1 spacewalk during this mission, a Russian record-setting 8-hour and 13-minute excursion that he conducted several weeks ago. Joe Acaba, with the completion of this flight later tonight and the end of his 3rd flight into space, will have accrued 306 days in space. Another long-duration mission several years ago on the station, and a space shuttle assembly mission before that. This completes Mark Vande Hei's 1st flight into space, 168 days, and Vande Hei also logged 4 spacewalks during Expeditions 53 and 54 in support of the upgrades made to the Canadarm2 robotic arm and the latching end effectors that were replaced and lubricated during the course of that mission. As I mentioned before, this crew began its journey of 5.5 months on board the International Space Station with its launch back in September from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This was the view on Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome as the Soyuz MS-06 lifted off from that launch pad. 8 minutes and 45 seconds later, the Soyuz separated from the third stage of the Soyuz booster into its preliminary orbit and made its way to the International Space Station just 4 orbits later, a 6-hour rendezvous that brought Mazurkin, Van de Hei, and Akaba to a docking to the Poisk module to begin their tenure on board the International Space Station as part of Expedition 53. In December, they transitioned to become part of Expedition 54.
Повторите, пожалуйста.
Come again, please.
Ваш, повторяю, я...
Georgi, I'm standing by if you need me. Mark didn't copy your message.
You're hearing an interpreter translating the conversations between the Soyuz flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow and the departing crew on board the International Space Station. They have activated the systems in the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. Again, Mazurkin will be in the center seat as Soyuz commander for undocking and landing today. He'll be flanked on his left by Mark Van de Hei and on his right by Joe Akaba. In the center section of the Soyuz spacecraft, the descent module, the only portion of the Soyuz spacecraft that returns to Earth. The situation down in Kazakhstan is this. The weather conditions, as they are this time of the year, every year, are posing challenges for recovery operations that are supervised by the Russian civilian search and recovery forces known as Rosaviatsia. Over the weekend, a NASA plane flew from Houston to the staging city of Karaganda, Kazakhstan, with a contingent of NASA personnel, followed by a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft that flew from Chkalovsky Aircraft outside Star City, Russia, which arrived in Karaganda on Sunday with an additional array of NASA and Russian personnel. Early Monday, with less than an optimal weather forecast in the offing for Kazakhstan, most of the NASA and Russian recovery team members flew on Russian Mi-8 helicopters from Karaganda 2 hours to the southwest to a forward staging point in the remote town of Jezkazgan, about 90 miles from the primary landing site.
Go ahead.
In the wee hours this morning, and with weather conditions deteriorating in south-central Kazakhstan, Rosaviatsia deployed several all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, from Jezkazgan to travel overland to or near the landing site. Among those making that trek were Chad Rowe, NASA's Director of Human Spaceflight in Russia, and NASA flight surgeon and 2 Russian nurses assigned to NASA. The situation as it stands at this moment is that the front that moved through the area of the south-central steppe of Kazakhstan, moving from northwest to southeast, bringing snow and freezing rain and other overcast conditions. It is moving to the southeast. The last word that we received here in Mission Control was that conditions were improving somewhat, and that we believe that the NASA plane, the NASA Gulfstream jet that is at the Karaganda airport, and the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft likely will be able to fly a short distance to the forward staging site in Jezkazgan. That would be good news, because that would imply that we will be conducting a nominal helicopter recovery operation later this evening. But that has not yet been confirmed by the Russian search and recovery forces. Everything is on the table for the safe recovery of Akaba, Van de Hei, and Mazurkin, and we'll be standing by for further word as the afternoon and evening move along. Aboard the International Space Station, in the passageway between the station's Russian segment and the hatchway in the vestibule and the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment, the crew is getting set up for its farewells and its hatch closure, which will be coming shortly. We're expecting the 6 crew members to gather in the neighborhood of about 1:50 p.m. Central Time, 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time, to say their final farewells to one another, after which Mazurkin, Van de Heij, and Akaba will float through the hatchway, take a final inspection of the seals along the circumference of the hatch to their Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, and close the hatch to begin the process of preparing to don their Sokol launch and entry suits, to strap themselves into their respective seats in the descent module of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, and to begin their preparations for undocking that is scheduled at 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. This view again, looking at the hatchway in the vestibule of the Poisk module of the International Space Station, looking into the hatch that is the Soyuz MS-06. The Soyuz has now been put on autonomous power as Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin, the Soyuz commander, was inside the Soyuz a short time ago, configuring the spacecraft for autonomous power, which it is on. A short time from now, the 6 crew members again will gather to say farewell to one another right in that area. On the left side of your screen, you're looking at one of the Russian spacesuits, the Orlan spacesuits that are worn for spacewalking activities outside of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Once again, as we mentioned earlier, the weather down in Kazakhstan, which has been very dicey over the past 48 hours, appears to be improving slightly. It is 1:30 in the morning at the landing site, and so before long, the NASA and Russian personnel that are comprising the search and recovery forces will be in the process of getting up from their respective hotels, getting a briefing on the weather, and hopefully making their way in the Russian Mi-8 helicopters down from Zhezkazgan for a 30-minute helicopter ride down in the vicinity of the landing zone. You're looking at NASA astronaut Mark Van de Heij as he stows some final gear inside the Soyuz spacecraft. Van de Heij again wrapping up his first flight into space, 168 days in space since he and his crewmates were launched in mid-September from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. So just to recap, a handful of all-terrain vehicles were dispatched for an overland trek in the wee hours this morning from Zhezkazgan toward the vicinity of the landing site. They're not quite there. They decided to stop their overnight journey and to take a rest. That's what they've been up to. Some number of kilometers away from the landing zone itself. They will resume their journey to the landing site a bit later in tonight's activities. The key here is the movement of the two prime recovery aircraft, the NASA Gulfstream jet and the Gagarin cosmonaut training aircraft, that are both on the runway at the airport in Karaganda, getting them down to Zhezkazgan, if that is in fact still the plan, a few hours from now, and then to fly the Russian Mi-8 helicopters much later in today's activities this evening from the Zhezkazgan airport down to the landing site. The preference is to try to stage recovery operations from the town of Zhezkazgan, which is only 90 miles away from the prime landing site in the southern zone. The Soyuz spacecraft will make a southwest to northeasterly trek during its final phase of its entry, following its deorbit burn, and by doing so will place the crew members just a short 30-minute helicopter ride away from their respective planes, and the rest of the search and recovery teams that will be gathered at the forward landing zone in Zhezkazgan. Van de Heij now in the hatchway as he is fitting his communications cap on so that he can make sure that he has a good fit and a good communications link through that communications cap once he suits up in his Sokol launch and entry suit a bit later on today. You just saw in the field of view a moment or two ago Russian cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov, who is now the Expedition 55 commander. Expedition 55 actually formally begins at the point of undocking, which will take place a little over 3.5 hours from now. That is how expeditions are marked in terms of their duration from undocking to undocking. So Expedition 54 will officially come to an end at the time the Soyuz MS-06 undocks, and Expedition 55 will begin under the command of Anton Shkaplerov. In advance of that, however, yesterday, on Monday, Shkaplerov took over the formal command of the International Space Station from his departing Russian cosmonaut crewmate, Alexander Mazurkin. Let's take a look back 24 hours at the change of command ceremony in which Mazurkin handed over command of the space station to Anton Shkaplerov.
So, if you're ready, we're ready to start our procedure, finally.
We're ready for you, Sasha.
Спасибо большое, Doug. Well, Houston, Huntsville, Munich, Tsukuba, Moscow, France. Expedition 54 is almost complete, and it's a great honor, a pleasure for me to realize that it was like one day. It looked like it started only yesterday, and already it's a finish of it. And it's a great pleasure. It was because of all these gentlemen. It was because of all you guys, all teams on the world in all MCCs. And we really respect your professionalism, your attitude. I really respect, gentlemen, your attitude and your professionalism, and I will never forget our jobs and staying here. And also, it's because not only work with you pleasure, work and share everywhere here with you, it's a great pleasure for me. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, MCCs, that you allowed us use this station. We didn't broke almost anything, and hope we did something good thing and helpful thing for science. And still looking forward now to going home back to the Earth and to work with you guys on the ground, and missing for you, gentlemen. Expedition 55 is your time, and this is your key of this fascinating car.
Nice key, Sasha, key of the International Space Station. First of all, I want to say this is a very important day for us, for all of us. I want to say thank you very much to our crewmates, our friends, our brothers, Sasha, Joe, and Mark. You did very good job here on board of the International Space Station, and now you are ready to return to our planet. Alexander, I'm proud to be part of the great team you have been leading here on board of the International Space Station. Now station is in the excellent condition, and we will do all the best to keeping this unique scientific laboratory fully functional and safe. With honor, I am taking commanded of the International Space Station for Expedition 55.
Well done. You have a very proud team down here. To Mark and Joe and Sasha, we wish you a safe journey home. Счастливо пути и мягкая посадка. And to Anton and to Maker and Nemo, to you guys, if the other team broke anything, we'll just blame it on Maker and Nemo. And now we're looking forward to having Mark and Joe and Sasha safely on the ground, and Anton and Maker and Nemo. We're looking forward to working with you over the coming days, and we wish you fair wind and following seas as you sail your ship.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doug.
Doug, thank you so much and hope to see you soon. Thanks.
And again, that was the scene 24 hours ago on Monday for the traditional change of command ceremony. In this case, Alexander Mazurkin, part of the departing crew, handing over command of the International Space Station to cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov. Shkaplerov and his two colleagues who will remain on board the International Space Station following undocking that's coming up a little over 3 hours or so from now. The remaining crew for Expedition 55 will be Anton Shkaplerov as the station commander, joined by NASA flight engineer Scott Tingle and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency flight engineer Norishige Kanai. The three of them will remain on board as a three-man crew for the next 3 weeks until the launch on March 21st of the next trio of residents to the International Space Station. That will be the station, the Soyuz commander, Oleg Artemyev, along with NASA astronauts Ricky Arnold and Drew Feustel, who will launch on March 21st in the Soyuz MS-08 spacecraft from the Baikonur Cosmodrome on a 2-day rendezvous, arriving at the International Space Station on March 23rd. You're looking inside the hatchway to the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. Joe Acaba and Mark Vande Hei, the two NASA astronauts who are just hours away from returning to Earth, along with Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin, making final preparations to their respective seats in the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft. As we are preparing for the farewells and hatch closure that will mark the end of their 6-man crew time together and the beginning of the final preparations that will lead to undocking at 5:08 p.m. Central Time, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. At the time of undocking, the International Space Station and the Soyuz spacecraft will be traveling 252 miles above the Earth. The Soyuz will separate from the Poisk module on the International Space Station's Russian segment of the International Space Station about 2 hours and 40 minutes or so after undocking. The deorbit burn will begin. This will be a 4-minute, 39-second retro firing of the engines on the back of the Soyuz to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. A short time later, we'll have the pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz. The descent module will be barreling through the Earth's atmosphere with temperatures building up to around 2,500 degrees around the spacecraft until it leaves the plasma regime, first deploying its parachutes, first a pilot chute, then its large drogue chute, and then the main chute in sequential fashion. The main chute deployment will then release the earlier chutes that will have Good day once again from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where at this hour we are standing by for the departure of 3 of the crew members who have resided aboard the International Space Station since last September, those being the departing members of the Expedition 54 crew who are suited up inside their Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, ready to depart the station and ready to begin the trek back home to a homecoming on the cloud-covered and icy steppe of Kazakhstan, with landing scheduled about 3 hours and 45 minutes from now. Here in the flight control room at Houston, the Orbit 3 team of flight controllers on duty presiding over their end of Soyuz departure operations. They're led by Flight Director Judd Freeling, who's at the bottom of your screen. He's joined on console to his right by Capcom Andreas Mogensen, the spacecraft communicator from the European Space Agency, who is talking to the station crew when required throughout the course of the rest of the day's activities. The landing operations, of course, are being handled half a world away at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow. This live view from a balcony camera overlooking their space station flight control room, showing the Russian flight controllers at their consoles. They have been talking to the crew on board the Soyuz MS-06 since the crew entered the Soyuz a few hours ago and strapped in for the beginning of their deorbit and landing preparations. The returning crew is led by Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin. He is strapped into the center seat of the Soyuz MS-06 descent module, the middle section of the 3-section Soyuz spacecraft. He is flanked on his left by NASA flight engineer Mark Vande Hei, who is the board engineer number 1 for tonight's landing operations, as he was for launch 5.5 months ago. Joe Acaba, the NASA flight engineer, is to Mazurkin's right. Those are the 3 that are preparing to return home after 168 days in space, 168 days on board the International Space Station. They are coming home with a total of 2,688 orbits to their credit, and a mission that will have spanned 71.1 million statute miles. We'll talk more about their statistics in just a moment. Down in Kazakhstan, the focus of attention has been on weather conditions throughout the course of the last 48 hours. Very challenging weather conditions that have taxed the Russian State Commission and the search and recovery forces belonging to Rosaviatsia, the Russian civilian search and recovery team. Earlier today, the Russian Landing Commission concluded their final meeting at the Russian Mission Control Center, and after a complete review of weather conditions and the status of all deployed forces, the decision was made to proceed with a nominal landing operation in the southern landing zone just to the southeast of the remote town of Zhezkazgan, with the landing site about 90 miles to the southeast of Zhezkazgan, where a team of NASA and Russian search and recovery personnel have been housed for the past 48 hours, waiting for the go-ahead to begin their deployment in Russian Mi-8 helicopters down to the landing site. At the moment, the weather is improving, and the weather appears to be in good shape to support a nominal landing operation this evening. The forecast for landing time at the landing site itself in the south central steppe of Kazakhstan calls for an overcast ceiling at 700 feet, 3 statute miles of visibility and light fog and a few snowflakes in the area. The winds will be out of the southwest at 12 knots, gusting to 18 knots, and the temperature expected to be about 30 degrees Fahrenheit to greet Mazurkin, Acaba, and Vande Hei when they touch down 3 hours and 41 minutes from now at about 8:31 p.m. Central Time, 9:31 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be 8:31 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Wednesday morning, just 27 minutes after sunrise. As we mentioned, the team of NASA and Russian recovery support personnel deployed from the staging city of Karaganda, Kazakhstan 2 days ago to Zhezkazgan, which is a forward staging point just 90 miles from the landing site. There are 2 aircraft of interest that remain at the Karaganda airport as part of tonight's recovery operations. No indication that they will be deployed to Zhezkazgan as well. One is the NASA Gulfstream jet that will ultimately fly Mark Vande Hei and Joe Acaba back to Houston. The other aircraft is a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft that flew other support personnel from Chkalovsky Airfield outside of Star City, Russia, and the training base for cosmonauts and astronauts flying on Soyuz vehicles. That GCTC aircraft flew on Sunday from just outside of Star City down to Karaganda. The current plan would call for the crew to be recovered after they are extracted from the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, to be loaded into 3 separate helicopters for the flight back to Karaganda, about a 2-hour helicopter ride from the landing site back to Karaganda, where they then would split up. Again, Vande Hei and Acaba to board a NASA jet to fly back to Houston, Alexander Mazurkin to board the GCTC aircraft to fly back to Chkalovsky Airfield outside of his training base and his home in Star City, Russia. Over the past 2.5 hours, the crew on board the Soyuz MS-06, Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Acaba, suited up in their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits, conducted good leak checks on those suits. Also, leak checks were performed on both sides of the docking interface between the Poisk module and the Soyuz spacecraft, to which it has been attached since September 13th of last year. The vestibule, the small passageway between Poisk and the Soyuz, has been depressurized down to vacuum, setting the stage for the undocking command that will take place just 14 minutes from now. That command that is sent from the Russian Mission Control Center, as you see on your screen in Korolyov, will be a 90-second command to initiate the opening of the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface that have been in place, holding the Soyuz tightly in place to the Poisk module. The hooks on the Poisk or ISS side of the docking interface were opened about 2 hours ago. Thrusters on the International Space Station have also been disabled to prevent any inadvertent thruster firings during the actual time of the undocking, which is scheduled for 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time, 6:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. Following the physical separation of the 2 vehicles that will be induced by the pushing off of springs on both sides of the docking interface, the Soyuz vehicle will slowly back away from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. There will be 2 separation burns of the Soyuz engines to increase its opening rate from the station itself. The first coming at 5:11 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time will be an 8-second burn to increase the opening rate by 0.53 meters per second, followed about a minute and a half later by a second separation burn, also of about 8 seconds in duration, that will continue the opening rate and create a separation rate that ultimately will take the Soyuz to a distance of about 12 miles away from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn that is scheduled 2 hours and 43 minutes from now. About 3 hours ago, just before 2 p.m. Central Time. The 6 crew members on the International Space Station had a final opportunity to say farewell to one another in the passageway at the Poisk module interface to the Soyuz spacecraft. The crew members that you see there, Alexander Mazurkin saying farewell to his colleagues, Anton Shkaplerov, Norishige Kanai of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Scott Tingle of NASA, who remained behind. At the moment of undocking, coming up just about 11.5 minutes from now, Expedition 54 will formally come to an end, and Expedition 55, under the command of Anton Shkaplerov, will begin. Shkaplerov took over command of the station on Monday afternoon in the typical change of command ceremony that was broadcast on NASA television. And as you can see in this replay of activities that took place about 3 hours ago, the hatches closed on both the Soyuz and station side of the docking interface in the Poisk module. This is Anton Shkaplerov completing the hatch closure that occurred at 1:58 p.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Eastern Time. The undocking that's coming up will enable the Soyuz MS-06 to separate from the Poisk module on the International Space Station. As you can see in this animation, the undocking again scheduled at 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time. The Soyuz will back away to a distance of about 12 miles from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn. This will be a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde firing of the Soyuz engines to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enabling it to drop out of orbit to begin its descent into the Earth's atmosphere. Some 34 minutes after the deorbit burn, the pyrotechnic command will be issued to separate the 3 sections of the Soyuz vehicle: the descent module with the crew strapped into their respective seats, the only section that survives re-entry, the heat shield pointed in the direction of travel to ablate the heat that will build up to about 2,500 degrees, after which the series of parachutes will be deployed. First will be 2 pilot parachutes which extract a drogue chute from the Soyuz vehicle, and then finally the huge main parachute that slows the Soyuz to a descent rate of about 7.2 meters per second. Just a few feet off the ground, half a dozen soft landing engines will fire, and the Soyuz will be home on the south central steppe of Kazakhstan, with touchdown scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time, which will be 8:31 a.m. in Kazakhstan on Wednesday morning, about 27 minutes after sunrise.
Хорошо, Гош, я принял.
Yes, copy, Gosha. Now prepare morally for the undocking. And RDR command will be sent from the panel? Yes, that's correct. It will be manually sent command from the panel.
Хорошо.
Copy that.
Так, пусто, да? Да, кажется, правильно. Спасибо.
Just 7 minutes now until the undocking command is issued to begin opening the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface. We're about 8.5 minutes away from physical separation. During their time on orbit, as we mentioned earlier, the crew returning to Earth tonight, Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Akaba, will have spent 168 days in space and on the station. It was a 4-orbit, 6-hour rendezvous for them back on September 13th after their launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. They will have completed 2,688 orbits of the Earth and 71.1 million miles of travel. Alexander Mazurkin wrapping up his second space flight and a total of 334 days in space. Joe Akaba completing his third mission, 1 space shuttle assembly flight, 2 long-duration missions on the station, 306 days in space on those 3 flights. Mark Vande Hei completing his first space flight, of course, 168 days, in which he accomplished 4 spacewalks during expeditions 53 and 54.
I'm preparing command R17. So the closed transmitter command is sent. Gosha, as soon as you start receiving the image, could you please tell us?
Alexander Mazurkin, the Soyuz MS-06 commander, who's in the center seat of the descent module, again flanked on his left by Mark Vande Hei, and on his right by Joe Akaba, reporting that the Soyuz is ready for undocking, which is coming up just over 6 minutes from now. The International Space Station is currently flying in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator, moving from southwest and northeast over southwestern China.
020200, we have sent E2 command. We have schedule repressed. We have 3 BDUs sensors, and we are at page 41 now. We copy you and confirm. So we have mechanical contact or docking mechanism engaged. So we're at page 41.
That call from the interpreter who is providing the translation of conversations between the Russian Soyuz shift flight director of the Russian Mission Control Center and Alexander Mazurkin on board the Soyuz, indicating that we have docking mechanism power up, as we are under 4 minutes from the command to be issued to open up the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface at the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station.
Yes, Mark, go ahead and activate it. The headlight R8.
Once undocking occurs, Expedition 55 will formally begin under the command of Anton Shkaplerov and his crewmates, NASA's Scott Tingle and Norishige Kanai of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, who will be a 3-man crew for the next 3 weeks until the launch on March 21st of the next trio to reside on the space station, that being Oleg Artemyev of Roscosmos and NASA's Drew Feustel and Ricky Arnold, who will lift off in the Soyuz MS-08 spacecraft from the Baikonur Cosmodrome on March 21st on a 2-day rendezvous to link up to the International Space Station and become part of Expedition 55.
Just once. Yes. Now, we are monitoring D2 and S16 from this display. At 0206, I will have to activate The 7. So the 2 and 16 are not illuminated, and we are ready to send this 7 command at 0206. We concur.
Хорошо. Ну и потом по вашему указанию 0207 будем готовы выдать команду D17.
And 0207 will be ready to send D17 command.
Less than 2 minutes away from the initiation of the undocking command, which will take 90 seconds to enable the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface to open, at which point springs on both sides of the interface will push off against one another to provide physical separation.
Is to be sent at the specified time. Copy that, Moscow.
Саша, посмотри, пожалуйста, на формате ТВС, горит ли виртуальный транспарант работы передатчика?
Sasha, could you please see the transmitter functioning on display is on? No, you don't have to do this. We are receiving the image right now. The 7 command has been sent. So the boom is drawn, and as well as the lectures, G17, and the hooks are closed.
30 seconds away from the undocking command, the International Space Station now crossing the border between China and Mongolia.
Copy. 17 seconds. 5. At 0207, we have sent the D17 command. The hooks are closed. Indicator is not illuminated.
The Soyuz hooks are now driving open.
And approach S13 is not illuminated, but S11 is illuminated.
This view is from the external camera on the Soyuz MS-06. Should provide us a view of the Soyuz at physical separation and backing away from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the station.
So 1 minute and a half. Copy, Moscow.
Механсоединение погасло.
So interface closed. The механсоединение is not illuminated anymore.
Standing by for physical separation.
1 minute 15.
Ожидаем режим ССВП выполнен. И физического...
We are standing by for the physical separation, and the SSVP mode is complete.
Хорошо.
We are receiving image. It is stable.
Undocking is confirmed.
Mode, complete.
Undocking confirmed at 5:08 p.m. Central Time, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time, as the Soyuz MS-06 and the International Space Station flew 252 statute miles over southeastern Mongolia. Alexander Mazurkin, Joe Akaba, Mark Vandehei on the first leg of the trip home.
We are standing by for your confirmation. Yes, Gosha, copy that. As soon as we get it, I will report it. Could you please send R5 command from the first panel? Mark, R5 command. Could you please send it? We are seeing the docking interface And we do not see any foreign objects on the docking interface. Okay, R5 command is sent. Thank you, Mark. We are receiving a very clear picture, very clear image. We are standing by for the first burn. Yes.
Again, undocking occurring at 5:08 p.m. Central Time. Expedition 55 now officially underway aboard the International Space Station. As we stand by for the first of 2 separation burns, this will be an automated 8-second burn of 4 of the Soyuz thrusters to increase its opening rate by 0.5 of a meter per second.
Okay, could you please send R8 command transition to the wide angle lens? Copy. D7, yes. I confirm D7 command. In 20 seconds, we're standing by for the first burn.
Now a wide-angle view from the external Soyuz television camera. Just below the crosshairs, you can see the Poisk module docking port from which the Soyuz just separated. Undocking again occurring at 5:08 p.m. Central Time. And the first of the 2 separation burns underway. This is an 8-second burn.
It is not illuminated anymore.
And that burn now complete, everything nominal. And the Soyuz now going into a roll program for the correct orientation for the second of the 2 burns coming up about 90 seconds from now, which will be a 15-second burn to further increase its opening rate from the station by 1.5 meters per second.
We see the joint GSO in attitude. Yes, we confirm. We also see joint GSO.
Seconds
20 seconds till the second burn. We confirm. Depot operation is on.
The second in the pair of separation burns now underway. This again a 15-second firing of the thrusters. And the second of the 2 separation burns complete. Everything looked great. So the opening rate now increasing between the Soyuz and the International Space Station. You see the full complex in view from the Soyuz external cameras as both vehicles pass over the far eastern coast of Russia over the Sea of Okhotsk. And there's a view of the Soyuz from external cameras on the International Space Station.
Now we have transitioned to the first manifold and sending the 8 command. Copy. So SSVP is deactivated and V18 command is being sent. Copy. Okay, we will input data for settings for the descent. Copy. The indicator is not illuminated. Copy. We are deactivating the headlight. The headlight is off. And we are transferring a route controller to transport position.
Again, this view, as the station and Soyuz have passed into an orbital sunrise of the Soyuz MS-06, which undocked from the International Space Station about 7 minutes ago. The Soyuz, with Alexander Mazurkin, Joe Acaba, and Mark Vande Hei on board, will move to a position about 12 miles away from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn that is scheduled just under 2 hours and 23 minutes from now.
Mark, please make sure that my spacesuit is not touching this handle. So we have uploaded the settings for descent, and we have the indicator descent illuminated, and we are ready to send the full command. Copy. Inaudible. We sent G4 command. Copy.
And a better view now of the Soyuz MS-06. Its solar arrays clearly in view. Again, the Soyuz comprised of 3 sections. The uppermost section is the orbital module, which has been depressurized in advance of the pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz following the deorbit burn later this evening. The crew is strapped into their respective seats in the middle section, with Mazurkin in the center seat, flanked on his left by Vande Hei and by Acaba on his right. The bottommost section is the instrumentation and propulsion module, which will have exhausted its lifetime of usefulness after the deorbit burn that's coming up in 2 hours and 21 minutes.
We consumed 9 kilograms of propellant.
Trying to find the vertical piece. I did not unlock the Sasha, Mark, Joe.
Sasha, Mark, and Joe. This is Anton. I wish you a successful flight. We are already missing you. Thank you, Georgi. This is not Georgi, this is Anton. Anton, you probably will be rich, because I did not recognize your voice. All right, we also wish you a successful flight on board the station, and we will be standing by for the pictures from the outer space. We'll be seeing you on the ground. Thank you. Well, this is MCC Moscow. We are not saying goodbye yet. We still have work to do. Altair.
There we go.
Right now, we don't have a lot to do for a while.
Okay, I see some wires. It doesn't on the way. That's okay. Yeah, this one. Okay.
This is Mission Control Houston, that conversation between Anton Shkaplerov and the crew on board the Soyuz MS-06. They're tied together for the time being by a VHF communications link. Shkaplerov indicating to the crew on board the Soyuz, we already miss you. And flight controllers of the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov indicating we still have work to do. That work
prepare.
In front of everybody involved here includes the deorbit burn 2 hours and 18 minutes from now. That will lead to a landing of the Soyuz on the steppe of south central Kazakhstan 3 hours and 11 minutes from now at 8:31 p.m. Central Time.
Mark, is it okay? Yes, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Down in Kazakhstan, the weather forecast for landing calls for an overcast ceiling at 700 feet. Visibility will be somewhat diminished, 3 statute miles, and light fog with a few snowflakes in the air. Winds out of the southwest, 12 knots gusting to 18, and a temperature of about 30 degrees Fahrenheit at landing time, which is not too bad for late February, given Kazakhstan weather conditions, which are very dynamic this time of the year. There is a team of NASA and Russian support personnel with the Russian search and recovery forces in the remote town of Kazakhstan, some 90 miles to the northwest of the intended landing site for the crew on board the Soyuz MS-06. The current plan is a nominal landing operation this evening that would call for 10 out of the 12 Russian Mi-8 helicopters to deploy from Kazakhstan for a 30-minute helicopter flight to the landing site to recover the crew, and then to return the crew to the staging city of Karaganda. That still could change if conditions degrade, but so far that is the nominal plan that is in play, and that was reviewed earlier today by the Russian State Landing Commission operating from the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow.
Do we have to press down, push the talk button? You know, 1 minute ago I asked a specialist about it, and they told me that, you know, they still want it to be pressed down. No problem.
Саша, давай так сделаем. Мы вам разрешаем ее отжать, но если появятся помехи, которые будут нам мешать...
Sasha, you know, it's a go to release the push-to-talk button, but if we have some interference that will prevent us from, you know, listening and receiving data, then you will have to push it again. All right, but in any case, we are standing by here, so if you want to talk to us, you know, just push your push-to-talk button. Copy that, Moscow.
Тут Москвы, Альтаиру.
Moscow, Altair. Go ahead, Sasha.
Для расширения моего кругозора.
For my awareness,
Ты сказал, что уставки...
you said that you have already entered the settings for descent, and when we will have the re-entry time on the display settings after you have activated accelerometer, Sasha, only after that.
That conversation with Alexander Mazurkin, or Sasha Mazurkin, aboard the International Space Station's Soyuz MS-06 vehicle that you see in view, has to do with his entry into the onboard computers on the descent settings, basically the timers that will kick off the deorbit burn 2 hours and 14 minutes from now, which will be a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde firing of the Soyuz main engine to slow the Soyuz down
are there on display, and they are all
by 128 meters per second, allowing it to slip out of orbit to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. All of the Soyuz systems in great shape. The stage set for the deorbit burn and the landing of this vehicle just 27 minutes after sunrise on Wednesday morning in south-central Kazakhstan near the town of Zhezkazgan. After landing, the crew will be extracted by the search and recovery teams and technical specialists from RSC Energia. Assuming conditions permit, they'll have a few minutes to be placed in chairs right outside of their vehicle to have a few moments to get their land legs back and their equilibrium. The nominal plan usually calls for the crew to be carried one by one in their chairs into a nearby inflatable medical tent for post-landing medical testing before they reboard a trio of helicopters for a 2-hour flight back to the staging city of Karaganda to the northeast of the landing site itself. Once in Karaganda, the crew will split up, with Akaba and Vandahai boarding a NASA jet to be returned to Houston. Alexander Mazurkin will board a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft to be flown back to Chkalovsky Airfield just outside of his training base and his home in Star City, Russia. You will be hearing from time to time a reference to the call sign of Altair. That is the call sign for the Soyuz vehicle selected by Mazurkin as the Soyuz commander. This is Mission Control Houston with everything going well aboard the Soyuz MS-06 following its undocking from the International Space Station. The 3 crew members on board the Soyuz are now just over 3 hours away from touching down in south-central Kazakhstan to complete 168 days in space and aboard the International Space Station. The 3 crew members left on board the station itself, now Expedition 55, under the command of Anton Shkaplerov, along with NASA's Scott Tingle and Norishige Kanai of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. They will be a 3-man crew for the next 3 weeks until the next trio of residents is launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, that being Oleg Artemiev of Roscosmos and 2 NASA flight engineers, Drew Feustel and Ricky Arnold. They will launch on March 21st for a 2-day rendezvous at the station, arriving at the station on March 23rd. So with that, we'll wrap up this broadcast for this evening. One more to go. That'll be our deorbit burn and landing broadcast. That will begin at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on NASA Television, and we'll carry that broadcast through the safe recovery of the crew down in south-central Kazakhstan. For now, we'll call it a broadcast, and we'll invite you back to rejoin us about an hour and a half from now for the return of the Expedition 54 crew members on Soyuz MS-06. For now, this is Mission Control Houston.